Ever since ScoMo announced that I'm not allowed to sell beers anymore, I've been cooped up in my house, drinking VB, bored out of my mind and having to pretend that I enjoy it. There's only so many times I can drink 4X and delve into the complex flavors before all I can taste is water. And that's where you come in. Hi, I'm Deck, NOLA's resident beer geek, and welcome to the very first episode of Styles of Beer and the opening episode for our new channel, Big Easy TV. The aim of this series is to show all of you out there some different styles of beer, show you some amazing local Adelaide brews, and give me an excuse to talk about beer so that I don't go insane. This is episode 1, and today I want to talk about sours. What is a sour beer, I hear you ask? Well, you should be able to get that from the name. But if not, it's a beer that is either gone intentionally sour or unintentionally gone sour. Disclaimer though, I wouldn't drink a beer that has unintentionally gone sour. There's a few ways that this can be achieved, and that's pretty dependent on the style of beer that you're trying to make, but mostly it's going to be using different strains of yeast and bacteria to achieve that flavor. Before the excessive use of hand sanitizer and modern cleaning techniques, most beers were a little bit sour. There are some brewers though that embrace this and develop their own styles using this, and that's how sour beers basically came to be. Flanders red ales and lambics come to mind. The style of beer has basically grown from there. Today I won't be tasting either of those beers because they're hard to find, and I want to show off some local beers. So instead, we'll be looking at a kettle sour, a Berliner Weisse, and then finally a Gose. So the first one that I want to talk to you about is the standard kettle sour. These are probably the most common types of sour knocking about in the Aussie craft beer scene at the moment, and that's for pretty good reason. They're versatile, approachable, and they're pretty quick to make in the grand scheme of things. Without diving too deep into the nitty-gritty of production, you basically start producing your beer as you would normally, and then when you have your wort, you take that, you boil it for just a few minutes to kill any wild yeast or bacteria that might be in it, and then you chuck in your lactobacillus culture. Basically close the lid, let it do its thing for a few days, then you boil it again to kill your lactobacillus, and then you move on to the rest of the brew as you would normally. And this kind of achieves a sour flavor as lactobacillus kind of creates that. So that's about as basic as I can explain it. I'm not claiming to be a brewing expert, but you get the picture. Kettle sours don't really have that funk that you'd get from a wild ferment or a lambic, and tend to just focus on that tart, sour flavor. Nor do they normally have a hoppy flavor. I mean, there is a few out there that have added that, but it's not super common. And it's pretty common to see fruited sours instead, so they kind of balance well that sort of sourness and that fruitiness. They tend to be relatively low ABV, between 3% and I'd say 4%, and so this basically in combination makes them one of my favorite sort of session beers, especially during the summer. Okay, so don't have a kettle sour here with me today. It's poor planning on our part. So instead we'll just move on to the Berliner Weisse. Do we have a glass for tasting? Oh, I have this right here. Yeah. Shit. Up next we have the Berliner Weisse. It's a traditional German-style wheat sour ale. According to Wikipedia, which is my most trusted source of information, by the late 19th century, Berliner Weisse was actually the most popular alcoholic drink in Berlin. But by the end of the 20th century, there was only 2 breweries left in the entire city that were actually making it. Nowadays though, it's produced throughout the world and is a beloved style of beer throughout the craft beer scene. Usually you're going to have anywhere between 22 to 50% malted wheat, and then the rest of the mash bill is going to be made up with usually Pilsner malt or something light in a similar style. Like the kettle sour, it's not really got a prominent hop flavor, again focusing on that sort of tart, sharp, sour flavor, with the addition of sort of a wheat characteristic. They tend to be made in a pretty similar way to the kettle sour, although you can use wild fermentation, but we're not getting into that today. Alright, all this talk has made me thirsty. Let's do a tasting. Swell passion fruit sour, which is a Berliner Weisse. Pour this bad boy up. Okay, shall we start with the nose? I mean, immediately, it's just passion fruit. Not much else to be expected there. It's a passion fruit sour. You do also get that really tart lactobacillus sort of nose on top of that and onto the tasting. So the passion fruit is not super strong in flavor. It's more on the nose. I mean, it is definitely still there, with a very sharp, almost lemon-like sour. Absolutely delicious, very refreshing. Okay, and this is available on Big Easy Drinks, link in the description. Shameless plug aside, let's move on to the Gose. Okay, and moving on to the Gose, and yes, that is how you pronounce it. Fight me in the comments below. It's also a wheat-based sour, but with the main sort of key difference being that it's got a bit of salt water, so a bit of salinity, and it's also spiced. Spiced in quotation marks. It's usually coriander these days. Historically, you could use any spice, but almost always you'll find it's coriander. Goses also tend to have a less sharp sourness and more of a mild lemon style sour compared to the last two beers especially anyway. A proper Gose is actually only supposed to contain wheat malt, salt water, coriander, and just a little bit of hops. But you'll find that most breweries these days will add flavors to it to kind of produce something a little bit more interesting. There's hardly anyone that produces just a standard Gose anymore. Right, and just like the one that I'm going to show you now, which is the Sierra Nevada Otra-Vez. It's one of my favorite sour beers of all time. It's pretty much the main reason I included the category of Gose into this video, because I can't pass up an opportunity to drink one of these. Will be available through the NOLA takeaway, so if you order some food with NOLA, get a can of this, or however many you like really. We've got plenty. Alright, let's do a tasting. So, immediately on the nose, I mean, it is a lime and agave sour, and it's just lime. Lime straight up on the nose. Incredibly refreshing, citrusy, with a little bit of sweetness, and that agave adding to that sweetness as well. Tasting it, it's still a lot of lime, mild agave, and a very mild salinity as well. It's not super sharp in its sourness, but it's incredibly refreshing and probably one of the best summer drinks. Or winter drinks, or any time. I'll drink it literally whenever. It's so good. Alright, well I'm pretty satisfied with the amount I got to talk about beer today. I can safely return to my VB-infested house for another week and pretend that I enjoy it again, and not get too bored of it until about this time next week when I inevitably go a little bit stir-crazy and have to come and talk at you about beer yet again. I'm feeling that's probably going to be a lager week next week, and no, that's not because it says that on the production schedule. I actually want to talk about lager. Alright, and tune in tomorrow, same time, for a slightly more Scottish version of me talking about whiskey for about the same amount of time. Until then,